Okay, I know Red Wings fans are really going to hate me for this video, but I just finished up that Red Wings video where I talked about how this format ultimately screws over Detroit. But it's not a screw over for the Montreal Canadiens, man. If you're a Habs fan taking a look at the draft lottery, the way this is laid out, and the playoffs, this is the best case scenario. Holy! Talk about getting the best of both worlds here. The Montreal Canadiens are one of the few teams who, under this system, with a 24-team play-in structure, with 8 teams already guaranteed the playoffs, and 16 other teams fighting for the remaining 8 spots, the Habs have nothing to lose here. And it's something that I think as a Montreal Canadiens fan, you have to be really, really excited about. Again, the inner Red Wings fan in me is upset and pissed off and frustrated that Detroit got screwed, but the Habs fan inside of me is really, really happy. Let's go over this right here. So, first off, the Montreal Canadiens are in the play-in series. They're facing off against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it looks like a series that could go either way depending on how Carey Price plays, depending on how good Domi is, how good Drouin is going to be if he comes back, if any of the Montreal Canadiens can play like we know they can play. And if they're able to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins in a best 3 out of 5 series, then boom, they're in the playoffs. They make the final 16 and they contend for the Stanley Cup. It's really funny, isn't it? How the Canadiens last year were one of the best teams ever to not make the playoffs, and how the Canadiens this year have a legitimate chance at being one of the worst teams to ever make the playoffs. All they have to do is beat the Pittsburgh Penguins and Sidney Crosby and Geno Malkin and Jake Gensel, and yeah, you know, that doesn't sound too easy, but the opportunity is there. 3 out of the next 5 games, the Montreal Canadiens have to win in order to get into the playoffs. Some may say it's unfair, but hey, the NHL could use the revenue from Montreal. The fans are very excited, the fans are very restless, and if there's any city that's going to give you extra revenue, the city in Quebec is definitely going to do that. Now, what happens if the Canadiens lose against the Penguins and they don't end up making the playoffs because of it? Well, the people who said that they didn't want playoffs, you guys are going to be happy, because the Montreal Canadiens can realistically still get a first overall pick if they lose. Oh my goodness, no way. This is absolute insanity. It's just that it falls under a few very specific sets of criteria that have to be met. First off, we have to lay out the terms, because in order for any of the teams that are in the play-in series to actually win a lottery pick, the draft lottery itself on June 26th has to go a certain way. Any one of these teams, Team A, Team B, Team C, Team D, etc., need to win first, second, or third overall. Primarily first, but first, second, or third. After the play-in rounds are over, and after Montreal, let's say they lose against the Pittsburgh Penguins, there will be a second lottery done to assign the Team A, the Team B, the Team C picks to whichever teams lose the play-in rounds. And the only catch here is that all of the teams that lose the play-in rounds have equal odds, which is a very, very weird system. I know Edmonton certainly doesn't need another first overall pick if they lose to Chicago, for example. But that's the idea that we have here. It's interesting because it gives a team like Montreal the opportunity to legitimately get a top 3 pick if they end up losing against Pittsburgh. So if you are one of the people who are saying, no, I don't want the playoffs, I want the draft pick, I want Lafrenière, I want that instead, then hey, that opportunity does exist. Now, that only falls under a specific set of criteria, we did say that, but what's the more likely scenario? What if, in the draft lottery, it goes Detroit, Ottawa, and everything is normal? Well, you got yourself a very interesting and normal scenario as well. Because let's say any of these bottom 7 teams win the first, second, and third overall lotteries, what happens then? If the Montreal Canadiens lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins, then take a look at this. A second draft lottery is not necessary, and the rest of the teams will be assorted just by point percentage, meaning that if the Montreal Canadiens lose to Pittsburgh and the first, second, and third overall picks are won by teams that are actually in the bottom 7, Montreal will get 8th overall. That's not a bad consolation prize, isn't it? An opportunity to dance in the playoffs. If you lose to the Penguins, then okay, no biggie, and you can still get 8th overall. Now, what's the worst case scenario here? Okay, the worst case scenario is if the 3 lotteries, first, second, and third overall, are won by play-in round losers, which means that Detroit goes over to 4, Ottawa goes over to 5 and 6, LA goes to 7, Anaheim to 8th. The worst case scenario sees this happening and Montreal not winning any of the 3 lotteries that happen after to award the first, second, or third overall pick. If this happens, let's say Edmonton gets first overall, Toronto gets second overall, and I don't know, Nashville gets third overall. The worst case scenario is that Montreal drops to 11 because the 7 teams that are already in the top 7 for the draft lottery odds get pushed over from 4 to 10. And then Montreal, who was just on the outskirts, gets pushed over from 8 to 11. It's not terrible. They were at 15 last year, 11 this year in a very, very worst case scenario that is unlikely. And honestly, I think the unlikelihood of that happening puts me in a position where I can say, yeah, you know, the Canadiens are honestly in the best case scenario here. Because if they lose out against the Pittsburgh Penguins, the odds are they either end up with a first, second, or third overall pick, or that 8th overall pick. Either of those scenarios is much more likely than them dropping all the way down to 11. So I think this system, even though it pisses off Detroit fans, it pisses off the inner Detroit fan inside of me, it makes the inner Habs fan very, very, very excited. And I think you have nothing to lose if you're a Habs fan here. If you wanted the draft pick, which is a very, very fair desire, there's honestly a better chance of the Habs getting that high draft pick than not. If the Habs end up winning against the Pittsburgh Penguins, then okay, cool, they're in the playoffs and their draft pick drops down to what, 16, something like that? Certainly that's something that a lot of people would dislike, but at the end of the day, your team is in the playoffs. Heck, in my opinion, it's unlikely that the Habs even beat the Penguins. So what's there to worry about? If you're in the playoffs, you're in. Your draft pick drops to 16, but you have a chance. If the Habs are actually able to beat Pittsburgh, then hey, there may be something else in this Habs team that we haven't seen before. And they would be setting the record for the worst team to make the playoffs ever? I'm not sure if that would be a record, but it would have to be because this team was not great this season. But in the likely event that they lose, hey, their draft pick stays at 8, it drops down to 11, worst case scenario, or it gets pushed up to 1, 2, or 3. This way, Lafrenière legitimately has a chance of coming to Montreal, and I don't know how happy I am to feel that. Obviously, I want the guy to go to Detroit. That's the team that deserves him the most, but Montreal's a better consolation prize, man. I would like him to go to Montreal than I would like him to go to Toronto or any of the other teams that have the potential of losing the first round in the play-ins, like Calgary or Edmonton. Oh, that'd be ugly. So, comment down below your thoughts about this playoff system, this play-in system, the draft lottery, and the like. If you're a Montreal Canadiens fan, how do you feel about it? Because in my opinion, there's no ill will that you can feel about this. The worst that you can feel is saying, hey, I wanted the draft pick, but oh no, the Canadiens just beat the Penguins. Oh yikes, we're in the playoffs. I don't think that's that bad. And if the Canadiens are able to get into the playoffs, then maybe they have a lot more to prove. If they don't, though, then their draft pick stays the same, their draft pick has a chance of becoming better, and we have ourselves a chance of getting a really good prospect in the top 12 of the 2020 NHL Entry Draft. So, that wraps up our video here today on the Montreal Canadiens and how this system affects them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below what you think. Social Dash Ross 99, and bye.